I hope you never find yourself fleeing for your life from a grizzly bear. But just in case you do, here's some good news. According to experts, grizzlies are generally slow to pick up on danger and even slower to respond appropriately. So if you ever see one charging straight for you, there's a chance it won't stop until it's right on top of you. And then you can just jump into your car and drive away. It's all part of being a super prepared tourist. But while we're on the subject of animals running towards danger, let me tell you about another animal that seems to be headed straight for disaster, kind of like a lemming. Some people might call them cute, but they're actually much more sinister than that. And yes, I am talking about mice. Mice that seem to have forgotten everything they learned in mouse school about avoiding humans. You know, the num1 rule, stay away from us. The no, 2 rule, remember the no. 1 rule, the no. 3 rule, if you see a cat, assume rule no. 1 no longer applies. At this point, you might be wondering, what is going on? What happened to the famous Yellowstone supervolcano that was supposed to blow any day now? Well, here's the deal. Experts are telling us that something strange is happening beneath the surface of Yellowstone National Park. There are all these animals who seem to know something we don't. Elk, bison, wolves, coyotes, bears, birds. They're all leaving Yellowstone in droves. They've been packing their bags for months, heading south in a mass migration that hasn't been seen in over 100 years. And it's not just them. For over a year now, the Earth itself has been shaking with thousands of earthquakes rumbling beneath the park, sending scientists scrambling to try and figure out what's going on. So, here's our question for today. With all this animal action, should we be worried that Yellowstone's famous supervolcano is about to blow, that it'll cover half the United States in ash and bring us all back to the Stone Age? Or are these animals just making a big fuss over nothing? Could it be that we humans are the only ones who don't know something's coming? Are we the lemmings running straight towards disaster? To answer that question, we need to take a trip to the famous grand old Yellowstone itself. Yellowstone National Park is famous for 2 things, its geysers and its supervolcano. So let's start with the geysers. Yellowstone is home to more than 10,000 hydrothermal features, including nearly half the world's geysers. In fact, the most famous one, Old Faithful, erupts every 90 minutes like clockwork. But recently, those geysers haven't been behaving like Old Faithful. Something's throwing off their delicate balance. This one goes off every 90 minutes. This one goes off whenever it wants. Since October 2022, scientists have recorded nearly 3,000 seismic events beneath Yellowstone, which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that before 2022, there were only about 2,000 earthquakes recorded in the entire 20th century. In July of 2023 alone, there were 368 earthquakes, including a magnitude 4.5 rattler that was felt 100 miles away. Locals in nearby cities like West Yellowstone and Jackson described it as the strongest earthquake they'd ever felt. But still, according to experts, these earthquakes aren't really anything to worry about. That's because Yellowstone has been rumbling and grumbling for hundreds of thousands of years, and it will continue to do so for hundreds of thousands more. And sure, some of these quakes are bigger than others, but compared to other volcanoes around the world, Yellowstone is as stable as Mount St. Helens after it exploded. So then, what's with all the animals? If the quakes aren't a big deal, why are the local elk and bison packing their bags and heading south? Well, to get to the bottom of this, we need to look at Yellowstone's fault lines. All those earthquakes that I just told you about happened along a 40-mile stretch of fault line known as the Yellowstone Seismic Zone, or YSZ for short. This area is what's known as a magma chamber, a giant underground layer of molten rock that could one day turn Yellowstone into a lake of lava and destroy everything for hundreds of miles around. Now, luckily for us, scientists have been studying this thing for decades, and they've been able to measure its size and monitor its temperature and even calculate how much magma it holds. And guess what? It turns out that the magma chamber under Yellowstone isn't even close to being full. According to researchers, the last time Yellowstone blew its top was 640,000 years ago, when it spewed 2,400 cubic kilometers of ash and pumice. and since then, the magma chamber has only filled up by about 10%. So while it may one day reach its limit, it's not going to happen anytime soon. And that means that all those earthquakes aren't the result of an imminent eruption. Instead, they're probably caused by something much smaller, like a little earthquake down south in Utah. See, back in March 2020, a magnitude 5.7 earthquake hit Utah, which at the time was the largest earthquake in the contiguous United States in over 30 years. It was felt as far away as California, Nevada, and New Mexico. And it happened to shake things up in Yellowstone too. Now, this isn't a coincidence. Utah and Yellowstone are connected by what's called a seismic swarm, meaning that earthquakes in one place often trigger earthquakes in the other. In fact, after the Utah earthquake, scientists began recording earthquakes along the Yellowstone seismic zone almost immediately. When the Utah earthquake hit, it triggered another earthquake right next door in southwestern Wyoming. Then that earthquake triggered another one in Yellowstone, and so on and so forth. The series of earthquakes finally came to a stop in June 2023. 3 months later, the animals started moving south. Now you might be wondering, how does one domino lead to a massive animal migration? Well, here's the thing. Each domino might look solid, but it's hollow on the inside. And that's kind of how the Earth is. It looks solid, but it's really just a thin layer on top of a hot, gooey mess. We call it the mantle. And when those dominoes fall, they cause the thin outer layer of Earth, aka the crust, to move ever so slightly. And that movement changes the pressure on the gooey mantle below, causing it to bubble up in new places and cool off in others. And you guessed it, it affects the geysers. In the spring of 2024, researchers noticed that the water level in Yellowstone's geysers had dropped significantly. Now you might think, big deal, it's just water. But for geysers, this is a huge deal. You see, geysers are like fancy champagne bottles. They need to be under a lot of pressure to stay fizzy. But when the pressure drops, they go flat, just like this one did, whose eruption went from this to this. And once they go flat, they don't come back to life very easily. So what does this mean for Yellowstone? Will its geysers go extinct? Will we forget about them and focus on the more reliable Old Faithful instead? Well, don't count those geysers out just yet. See, there's something about them that we humans don't really understand, like how this geyser went from dormant for 70 years to erupting multiple times a day. Scientists think that Underground Lake is actually connected to the park's hydrothermal features, and when the earthquake hit, it could have opened up a new connection between the two. But whether that's true or not, there's one thing that scientists are sure of. The animals aren't running away from an earthquake swarm or dying geysers. They're running from something much more terrifying than that. And if you want to know what it is, you'll have to tune in next time. Because when it comes to Yellowstone, the animals always know something we don't. Thanks for watching.